Hello, AP students. We are trying something new this time around. I downloaded a new piece of software. Hopefully this one will help write on stuff, which is cool. And we're going to try to make this a little more interactive for you. Teaching AP like this is going to be difficult, but I want you guys to just bear with me and be thorough and be confident that this can help you surpass that exam. Now, obviously, we had just finished World War I and the Russian Revolution. So when we start looking at the impact of those events, you start looking at the other countries that were involved. Japan is one of those nations that truly had, ups and downs during World War I. Now try to remember, they joined the side of the Allies in 1915, so they weren't involved in the very beginning. Now the reason I mention this fact is because when we look at the Treaty of Versailles and we look at how Germany was punished, we also look at that some of the Allied powers didn't receive what they thought they deserved. Italy and Japan were two nations that were severely wounded by the Treaty of Versailles. Japan wanted some money and they wanted a few colonies for their efforts in the war, and sadly they received nothing. Now this will come back to play a role when we get to World War II. But for now, let's look at how World War I affected Japan. We know for a fact that Japan was one of those countries that really did take a little bit of a beating in the war, but because the war did not take place on Japanese soil, similar to the United States, they were able to recover economically much faster than other places. And this is really, really important because when we look at the end of World War I and we look at the impact it had on Europe, $300 billion in damage, millions dead, terrible, terrible, terrible impact. But when you look at Japan, you don't see that. You don't get that. You get a quick rebound. Japan was able to recover quite nicely and quite quickly. But one of the things that they did reshape was a new form of government. They decided to create a democratic style government similar to that in Europe. They believed that a democratic system gave the people more of a voice, and they even offered young men the chance to vote. Now, of course, when I say men, you know that I mean men. Women did not receive the right to vote until a little later in Japanese history. But for now, we look at it for what it is, a rebirth of the Japanese world. Unfortunately, no matter how prosperous a nation is, and no matter how great a period of history is, sometimes there are outside factors that can lead to the demise of a nation's prosperity. So even though Japan was increasing in industry and industrialization, once this event happened in 1929, the Great Depression, all of the things that you see here, all of the rise of that right there, all of the increase in that right there, you start to really understand that the Great Depression is going to cripple their world. This here is a picture of a Japanese bread line, or I guess similar to a Japanese bread line. In Japan, it was a rice line. What you guys can see here, and I'll circle it in red, that each person brings a pot, they bring a basket, this man here has a jar, and what they're doing there is they're going there for their ration. The government aimed to help its people survive the Great Depression, but even though they helped, it was minimal at best. The Great Depression was a nightmare for countries around the world. Slow trade, unemployment, starvation, chaos, riots. This event, the Great Depression, is going to shake the foundations of not only the economic society in Japan, but we're talking about the economic system that functioned around the world. Whenever you run into a situation where people are desperate, they are looking for someone to offer a quick fix. In 1931, a military government began to promise change. They said that even though we are starving, there's plenty of food out there. And that was if they expanded their world. Now, they had already taken Korea in 1910, but they believed that this area right here, Manchuria, was loaded with natural resources, food supplies, and things that were essential to getting them out of the Great Depression. Now, pay no attention to this right here. This is going to happen right up until World War II in the late 1930s. Right now, we're going to focus on this area here. Manchuria was the target. The military government promised that if they entered Manchuria, they would not only drain their resources, but this would replenish those areas of need in Japan. Now, of course, a logical person would say this was not a good idea. But when people are desperate, invading, attacking this area, I don't like that color, attacking this area here was really the right move for the Japanese. Now, unfortunately, we did have an institution that existed in 1919. The only aspect of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points that was accepted was the League of Nations. But try to remember, guys, the League of Nations was only as effective as its members. And since the United States did not join, and since there was no standing army for any element of the League of Nations, they were absolutely ineffective. I love this political cartoon. I know you guys probably can't see it. It says international strife, meaning that there are problems going around the world. Here is Snake Man, who's about to dine on Little Bunny, and this is right before Easter, so it's a sad, sad, sad picture. But in reality, the League of Nations was useless. They were too weak to stop it, and the Japanese will invade China. Now try to remember, there has only been one group of people that were ever successful enough to conquer the Chinese. And that was, of course, Kublai Khan and the Mongols way back in the late 1200s. So the Japanese, the little nation Japan, going up against China, they were outmatched. Not because of their soldiers. The Japanese were absolutely better prepared. They had better weapons. They had more military. They had modernized guns and weapons that were just totally outclassing the Chinese. But the Chinese does have one advantage, and that is size. So when the Japanese realized that there was no way that they had enough manpower to conquer all of China, they decided to do the only thing they could think of, and that was pick one city and totally destroy it. The belief was that if they destroyed this one city, that China would surrender. Now, folks, before I move on to the next slide, I want to warn you that the next few slides are extremely graphic. We are going to enter into another mass genocide. Now, try to remember, we've talked about 2 genocides already this year. The first was in 1915 to 1917 when the Ottoman Turks destroyed the Armenians during World War I. The second was a couple of weeks ago when Stalin used forced collectivization to starve the Ukrainians in 1932 to 33, leading to the deaths of around 8 million people. But although those events had much larger death tolls, Armenians 1.5 million, Ukrainians 8 million, the sheer severity of the event that happened in China makes this event, known as the Rape of Nanking, one of the worst events in human history. The Chinese army was just too weak to stop it, and unfortunately, you are going to see brutality to the max. An estimated 300,000 people are going to die, and they are going to die in brutal ways. So over here you see a man being stabbed with a bayonet. This was used as practice. The soldiers were asked to practice on live human beings. But this is the more traditional way. Decapitation was the way they would kill, and you can see this man is just praying. But the Japanese soldiers didn't seem to care. Mass execution was the way to go. Now this is a very, very famous picture. If you notice this right here, you got 2 score, 106 to 105. These 2 generals right here had a competition to see who could kill 100 people faster. And they literally updated the news every day. They wanted to kill and brutalized, and they did it very effectively. So here are some more images of the brutal nature of the attacks by the Japanese on the Chinese. And I'm telling you now, if you Google search this event, you will see images that will make your skin crawl. Decapitations, and this man here is posing in a way, you can see him right here. He is posing in a way to show off his kills, and it's really quite disturbing when you realize the brutality of this event. These are Chinese people being buried alive by the Japanese. But here's the twist. The Japanese say that this is not what happened. The Japanese give a different account, that these dead bodies here, and there are a lot of dead bodies, that these dead bodies here were soldiers. But women and children were not soldiers. So this is a Japanese account taken in 2005 when they opened up a museum in Japan to explain the bravery of the Japanese soldiers. This said that the Japanese attacked a city of soldiers when in reality they attacked a city of civilians. It's amazing what point of view means in history. The Japanese account versus the stories I just told you gives you a clear picture that this was just pure brutality. And unfortunately, at the end, the death toll rose and rose. But in the end, clearly, the size of China made it too difficult to conquer. And unfortunately, China versus Japan ends in a stalemate. Now, we will not see any other ground moved or any other growth until World War II in 1939. All right, guys? So this is pretty much how Japan rises from devastated and saddened by World War I to prosperous economic growth, to completely destroyed by the Great Depression, to the rise of the Japanese militarists, to expansionists, colonists, World War II. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it made sense. Please, please, please feel free to comment on the YouTube link that I send out. If there are any questions, obviously, you can reach me through Remind. I'll talk to you guys soon.